Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Yahya.
عليك السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Alhamdulillah, we've been studying Kitab al-Zakah of Sahib al-Hidayah, Allama Marghinani, rahimahullah. We've covered the introduction, few sides of Kitab al-Zakah. We were discussing in the last matan, we were discussing regarding a majnoon. So, وَلَيْسَ عَلَى الصَّبِيِّ وَالْمَجْنُونِ زَكَاتٌ. Upon the sabi, upon the child, similarly upon the majnoon, there is no zakah. And that mas'ala was clear. We had the reasons given for that, the ikhtilaf of Imam Shafi and the reasons for Imam Shafi and also the reasons for Ahnaf were mentioned. And some further rulings were also covered. Now, continuing from there was the mas'ala regarding a majnoon. However, a majnoon can be of two types. Al-majnoon al-da'im, so I'll call him majnoon. So majnoon can be of two types. Majnoon da'im, continuous junoon, and majnoon arid. They have junoon, they don't have junoon, or I'll call it ghair da'im. Ghair da'im. Basically, what majnoon ghair da'im means is some parts of the year or some parts during the day or sometimes some seasons they are perfectly fine and other seasons they reach the threshold of junoon. Now it happens to some people that they might not continuously be majnoon. They might be majnoon sometimes, they might not be majnoon sometimes. For example, medication they might be having that time, they might be better. They know exactly what they're talking about. So we call that ifaqa. Ghair daim, basically ifaqa is health. They're healthy, they're perfectly fine. So you can get, obviously a lot of people are 100% ifaqa. There'll be some people who are 100% majnoon. But there'll be some people that are in between majnoon and ifaqa. Now the rule is simple. If a person has ifaqa, that means he's aqil. If he's aqil, he's mukallaf of doing everything. Salah, sawm, zakah, hajj. Whereas on the other hand, you might have someone who's majnoon. Majnoon is ghair aqil. And as we know in Sharia, so many masail, a ghair aqil just doesn't, is just not responsible for it. Their actions don't even count. For example, if they do a bay, that bay won't even count. That transaction won't even count. So if it's a ifaqa person and a majnoon person, very simple ruling. Because one's aqil, one's ghair aqil. But it gets complicated when there's a mixture. Some parts of the year you have ifaqa, some parts of the year you junoon. So the true correct answer is the exact times when he has majnoon, when he is junoon, when he's ghair aqil, those transactions won't count. And the times when he's aqil, those masail or those scenarios, they will be mukallaf. That's the normal default rule. There are some exceptions from that which we will study. One or two will come in Kitab al-Zakah and others will come in relevant chapters. So now in regards to Kitab al-Zakah, remember zakah works on an annual basis. So for example, 10th Muharram is when I first reach the nisab. So I don't need to give zakat then, but the next year, 10th Muharram, my first zakat anniversary, I will have to start giving zakah from then. So my first zakat anniversary. Now imagine the person throughout this year, he was aqil, he had ifaqa, he was healthy. But yes, there were moments in the 12 months, they were equivalent to 2 months where he was majnoon. For 2 months he was majnoon. For 10 months he was perfectly fine, but for 2 months he was majnoon. So will you say, so let's just say this person, for example, let's just say myself. So I was in this scenario, 10th Muharram, the next 10th Muharram, first year of Zakah anniversary. But during that year, majority of the year I was perfectly fine. 2 years I was majnoon. So my question to you now is, on 10th Muharram, will I need to pay zakat or not? What will you say, Yahya?
I I think you should be paid zakat.
Okay, so that is the correct answer. But is there any detail that you want to mention, or you think that's it?
I would say the transactions that taken place within those 2 months that were without the permission, without the approval of a guardian, then I don't think they would count to the zakat. So you'd take away anything that's happened in those 2 months.
So you're going very deep into this. You're saying out of the 12 months, basically give zakah for the 10 months, not for the 2 months.
Yep.
For the transactions that happen in the 2 months. The problem with that is that will become very messy. It'll become very messy. And nothing to do with Kitab al-Zakah, but from a Kitab al-Buyu perspective, yeah, while some majnoon, the transactions that are done, they won't even count. They won't even count. So there's no real question about those 2 months transactions anyway. We're trying to focus on, will the zakat on my zakat anniversary be given for whatever amount of money I have? The truth is, those 2 months, it'll be my guardian who was doing the transactions on behalf of me. So whatever money the guardian made on behalf of me, yes, that will be my money, and I will have to give zakat on that as well. Because as you can see, that I'm semi-okay and semi-majnoon. Meaning some parts of the year is majnoon, some parts of the year is okay. So because some parts of the year I'm okay, you will have to give zakat. Is that clear?
Yep, that's clear.
Now actually there's a bit of ikhtilaf between, for example, Imam Muhammad and Imam Abu Yusuf on this mas'ala. Imam Abu Yusuf says you have to check the majority of the year whether you are majnoon or not. So Imam Abu Yusuf, AY, Imam Abu Yusuf, he says check majority, akthar, check akthar, majority. And he applies the qaida lil akthari hukmul kull. He says if for majority of the year I was majnoon, so if majority of the year, let's just say for 10 months I was majnoon, he'll say that's as though you saying for full year you are majnoon, you don't need to give zakat that year. Whereas in our scenario above, when I was only majnoon for 2 months, he says majority of the year you are perfectly fine, so that means you are fine for the full year and you will have to give zakat for it. Is it clear what Imam Abu Yusuf is saying?
Yeah.
So he's saying look at what majority is. So if it's majority is majnoon, then that's as though the full year you are majnoon. If majority is you are okay, then full year it means you are okay. Now someone may ask, what will Imam Abu Yusuf say if exactly half the year you are majnoon and exactly half the year you are not majnoon? I've not found an explicit text from Imam Abu Yusuf in regards to that, but I would guess based on other masail that Imam Abu Yusuf will say you have to give the zakat then ihtiyatan. Is that clear?
Yeah, that's clear.
Okay, that's Imam Abu Yusuf. Now Imam Muhammad. Imam Muhammad says even for 1 day, in fact for 1 second, even for 1 day, a juz of the year, if you are perfectly fine for a juz of the year, you will have to give zakah. Give zakah. So even if for one part of the day, one part of the year, you are perfectly fine, you have to give zakah. And why does Imam Muhammad say that? He goes into a usulul fiqh discussion. And Imam Muhammad says, look, sabab for a hukm to apply, for a ruling to apply in the hukm here is zakah, wujubu zakah, wujubu zakah. For a hukm to apply, a sabab needs to be found. A cause of the hukm needs to be found. For example, I need to pray Asr Salah today. Well, the cause for Asr Salah is the time of Asr starting. If a person passes away before the time of Asr, that Asr Salah was never wajib upon him because the sabab was not found. For example, fasting of Ramadan. Fasting of Ramadan, the cause, the sababus sawm, the cause for fasting is the occurrence of Ramadan. If a person passes away before Ramadan comes, he doesn't need to fast because he never found the sabab. So for any hukm, you must have a sabab for it, a cause for it. Once the cause comes, then the hukm comes, or the hukm is also referred to in the usulul fiqh books as musabbab. Hukm and musabbab is the same thing. So once the cause comes, only then the musabbab, or only then the hukm comes. Now what's the cause and what's the sabab for zakat? So what's the sabab for zakat? It came earlier. What's the sabab for zakat?
Having passing the nisab and a whole year passing over it.
Having the nisab, and then a year passing. So having the nisab and the year passing. Main is having the nisab actually. Rather than the year passing, it's mainly the having the nisab. Once you have the nisab, the cause is found. It's like, once you have the nisab, it's like salah time has occurred now. Asr salah time has occurred. I'm still alive. I now need to pray my asr salah. So the nisab has happened. So now you can start paying your zakah. Although it only becomes wajib to pay it after 1 year, but you can start paying your zakah. So the cause is the nisab. Now after the sabab is found, Imam Muhammad says, even for 1 minute or 1 day, if you are perfectly fine, it's like the ruling has applied upon you. I'll give an example. If during salah, asr salah, 5 o'clock till 7 o'clock, the time of asr salah happened. Now once it happened, you are perfectly fine in these first 15-20 minutes. But then you went into some, let's just say majnoon. But those 15 minutes you are okay. Now that means because there was some time after the sabab was found, there was some time when you are okay, you will have to pray that salah. When you become better, you will have to pray that salah. You'll have to do qadha of that salah. You'll have to pray that salah. Is that clear?
Yep, that's clear.
Similarly, Imam Muhammad says, after the nisab is found, even if any 1 day you are okay, you will have to perform that action of paying zakah once the year finishes. Done. Now let's go through the ibarat, Arabic translation. وَلَوْ أَفَاقَ فِي بَعْضِ السَّنَةِ. If a person is conscious or mentally stable, intellectually stable, في بعض السنة, even in part of the year. He might not be for the full year, but even in part of the year, he was perfectly fine. Part even means 1 day. فهو بمنزلة إفاقته في بعض الشهر في الصوم. فهو بمنزلة إفاقته في بعض الشهر في الصوم. It is as though he was conscious for 1 day or part of the month of Ramadan in regards to fasting mas'ala. I'll explain this mas'ala. It's a Kitab al-Sawm mas'ala. In regards to, and by the way, this happens a lot in Hidayah, where our author will bring in other masail from other chapters. Sometimes we might not have even covered those chapters, so you kind of need to know the background of that mas'ala as well. So in regards to Kitab al-Sawm and Ramadan, the rule is, if a person for the full Ramadan, full 30 days, or even before Ramadan, after Ramadan, the main part is for the full 30 days. If a person is majnoon, the full 30 days, literally from the very beginning he was majnoon. What's the sabab of Ramadan fasting? The occurrence of the?
At the time.
The month. So the first of Ramadan, you can say. The Maghrib Salah, when it's the first of Ramadan. When you see the new moon. So the occurrence of Ramadan, that's the sabab for Ramadan. So the start of the month, that's the sabab. That's the sabab. From the sabab, or even before the sabab, a person is majnoon all the way till the end. Full Ramadan. We will say because he was majnoon for the full month, it's as though that month Ramadan fast never became wajib upon him. Because he was like unconscious for the full year. For the full salah time, he was unconscious. That salah time just doesn't occur for him. However, during the month, he had some days where he was majnoon. Let's just say he had 29 days when he was majnoon. But in between there was 1 day when he was perfectly fine, when he was conscious. We'll say because of that 1 day where he was conscious, it's as though the sabab of Ramadan has occurred upon him. And now, because the sabab is found for fasting, he will have to fast for all 30 days. Yes, he'll fast the 1 day right now when he's perfectly fine. As for the other 29 days when he's ill, you can say, when he becomes better later in life, he'll do qadha of those fasts. Whereas the scenario where he was majnoon for the full month, he never even had to do qadha. But when he was okay for even 1 day, because of that 1 day where he's found where he could fast, he'll now basically have to fast the other 29 days as well. Yes, if he's ill, then he's forgiven to fast right now, but he will have to do qadha later because the wujub has happened upon him because the sabab is found. And by the way, I gave the example of 1 day of Ramadan. In fact, even if it's for 1 hour of Ramadan, he was okay, then the sabab is found. And once the sabab is found, he will now have to do those fasts, whether right now or whether later when he becomes better, he has to do qada. Similarly, in zakah, if for one day of the year he was perfectly fine, he will now, the sabab is found, so for the rest of the year, he will now have to give zakat for it as well. Is that clear?
Yep, that's clear.
فَهُوَ بِمَنْزِلَةِ إِفَاقَتِهِ فِي بَعْدِ الشَّهْرِ فِي الصَّوْمِ. So it's like the person who's conscious for even just part of the month of Ramadan in regards to the Sawm mas'ala, Sawm ruling. Then Alhamdulillah. وَعَنْ أَبِي يُوسُف. All of this, what we've explained so far in the Arabic, وَلَوْ أَفَاقَ, all of that was Imam Muhammad's view. But Imam Abu Yusuf has a different view here. So Imam Abu Yusuf, you can say, has a different view. وعن أبي يوسف أنه يعتبر أكثر الحول أنه يعتبر أكثر الحول. Imam Abu Yusuf considers the scenario of a person for majority of the year. For majority of the year, is a person majnoon? Yes, then that means he's majnoon for the full year, he doesn't need to give zakah. For majority of the year, was he perfectly fine? Yes, then that means he was perfectly fine for the full year, he needs to give zakah. What's his reason? Al-Aktharu fi hukm al-kull, or lil-Akthari hukm al-kull. Then, now our author goes into something side note here. Now, by the way, a student may have a question here. Okay, that's for Kitab al-Zakāt, Imam Abu Yusuf's view. What's his view in regards to ash-shahru fi as-sawm, that mas'ala that we just explained? So our author's not explained Imam Abu Yusuf's view in this. The Sharihin do explain it. They do indicate to certain riwayat of Imam Abu Yusuf. But I don't want to actually go into that view of Imam Abu Yusuf simply because that's a Kitab al-Sawm mas'ala. I like to stick to either our book and explaining our book wherever we need to explain it, or stick to the zakah masail here. If we start talking about Kitab al-Sawm and bringing that in, then we'll get very complicated and confused. Therefore, let's leave those masail of Sawm for Kitab al-Sawm, inshallah. So you can note these questions down for Kitab al-Sawm. Yes, I did explain a bit regarding Kitab al-Sawm because to understand this line, I had to explain that part. Is that clear, Yahya?
Yep, that's clear.
Then next part. Now our author goes on to a slight different mas'ala, and he's focusing mainly on Imam Muhammad, you can say right now. As I mentioned, there's two types of majnoon, da'im and ghair da'im. But there's another classification of majnoon as well, a more famous one actually. So a majnoon classification can be divided into two. Majnoon asli, and majnoon tari', or that's also called majnoon aridi. Our author calls it aridi. Majnoon asli is someone who became majnoon even before they became baligh. So either from birth or when they were in young age, from the age of 3, 4, 5, 6, they became majnoon and they continue to remain majnoon all the way till bulugh. Basically, they became baligh in the state of junoon. They became majnoon aslis, they become baligh. Let's just say they become baligh at the age of 15. At the age of 15, they were already majnoon by then. That's majnoon asli. Whereas majnoon tari' or majnoon aridi, temporary or tari means to occur. So majnoon tari' or majnoon aridi are those people who when they were baligh, they were perfectly fine. It's later in life, when they were 25 years old, 35 years old, 40 years old, they became majnoon. That's majnoon tari' or aridi. Now in regards to this mas'ala which we're studying about zakah, does it matter whether it was junoon asli or junoon aridi? So our author says, especially carrying on Imam Muhammad's view, وَلَا فَرْقَ بَيْنَ الْأَصْلِ وَالْعَارِضِ. This mas'ala that Imam Abu Yusuf mentioned, وَلَوْ أَفَاقَ فِي بَعْدِ السَّنَةِ فَهُوَ بِمَنْزِلَةِ basically, وَلَوْ أَفَاقَ فِي بَعْدِ السَّنَةِ, he needs to basically give zakah. Saying, وَلَا فَرْقَ بَيْنَ الْأَصْلِ وَالْعَارِضِ. Whether a person became baligh in junoon state, or whether junoon only happened later, they will need to give zakat if for even one day of the year they are perfectly fine, they are conscious. I'll explain with an example. Focus on Imam Muhammad's view, which he says even for one day of the year, they're okay. Let's just say a person becomes baligh. So we're going to apply the same example, one majnoon asli scenario and one majnoon aradi. And in both, we're trying to keep it almost identical scenarios. So 15-year-old, exact 15 years of age, and they became baligh. Now this 15-year-old, both majnoon asli, majnoon aradi. Now the majnoon asli person, he's majnoon asli. That means that 15-year-old, was he majnoon when he turned baligh? Was he majnoon?
The
Majnoon asli.
Yeah, he was
He
Majnun.
was majnoon. So he's majnoon. Now he's majnoon. He's got a lot of wealth. For some, either the government gave him wealth or his parents gave him wealth or whatever reason, inheritance, fine inheritance, he got wealth, but he's got a lot of wealth. Obviously, if a person's wealthy, he normally gives zakah, but because he's majnoon, he won't need to give zakah. However, before he turns 16, really it should be based on Islamic year. So let's just say 15, let's say we talk about Islamic year, 15-year-old in terms of Islamically, and then before he turns 16-year-old Islamically. During the year, there was a month when he was perfectly fine. So 1 month he became better. So he was a majnoon asli, but let's just say on the 7th month, so 7th month, he became perfectly fine. So look, until the first 6 months, you are thinking he doesn't need to give zakah. But then all of a sudden he became better. He's perfectly fine now. He's conscious. Doctors have approved he's conscious. And then he became majnoon again. Now at the age of 16, will he need to give zakah, or will his guardians, or if he's perfectly fine at that time, will he need to give zakat at that time? What do you think?
So I can
What of
guess
Imam
that
Muhammad?
so I can guess that Imam Muhammad's view is that you would have to give zakat, and Imam Abu Yusuf said you wouldn't because it's not the majority. But Imam Muhammad would say that
No,
even if
we're focusing on Imam Muhammad's view right now. But it's true what you said. Imam is correct what you said regarding Imam Abu Yusuf as well. But Imam Muhammad will say, yes, you need to give zakah. Why? Because for 1 month of the year, you are perfectly fine. Now, let's go with the other example. Junun Aradi, 15-year-old. Now, 15-year-old, now the 15-year-old has money. They've just become baligh. So until, whilst they were a child, they never had to give zakah, but now they become baligh. So now their zakah time starts. So after 1 year, when they become 16-year-old, they will need to give zakat on the zakat anniversary. That will be the first time they'll be giving zakat. However, during the year, this person becomes majnoon. Let's just say he's majnoon. He becomes majnoon on the 7th month again. He becomes majnoon, and he's majnoon 1 or 2 months into his 16-year-old life. Will he have to give zakah? So at 16 years of age, during that year, he was okay for some part of the year. Will he have to give zakah?
yeah.
Yeah, him or his guardian, or later in his life, he'll have to give it. So yes, that's perfectly fine. So Imam Muhammad simply looks at, during the year 15 to 16-year-old, was he perfectly fine for even 1 month or 1 day? If he was perfectly fine, he'll have to give zakah. So وَلَا فَرْقَ بَيْنَ الْأَصْلِ وَالْعَارِضِ. There is no difference whether a person was junoon at the age of bulugh, or whether he wasn't majnoon at the age of bulugh, rather he became majnoon later. The mas'ala doesn't change. I've just explained it fully. Now you might say, why did I have to explain it so much? The reason is because of the next line. وَعَنْ أَبِي حَنِيفَةَ رَحِمَهُ اللَّهِ. Imam Abu Hanifa says, أَنَّهُ إِذَا بَلَغَ. Basically, before I explain the Arabic, I'll briefly mention Imam Abu Hanifa agrees with Imam Muhammad in Majnoon Aradi. He agrees with the mas'ala we just said here regarding Majnoon Aradi. However, when it comes to Majnoon Asli, he doesn't agree with the answer we gave. I'll explain how Imam Abu Hanifa explains the Majnoon Asli mas'ala. So it's really the Majnoon Asli one that I wanted to embed, that this is how Imam Muhammad explains. However, Imam Abu Hanifa, he explains the Majnoon Asli mas'ala slightly differently. So Imam Abu Hanifa says, Majnoon Asli. That means a person was Majnoon. A person 15-year-old. At the age of 15-year-old, they were Majnoon. So Imam Abu Hanifa says, now if he's majnoon, we count this as though he doesn't need to give zakat yet. Then on the seventh month, he became better. Now when he's 16-year-old, so 6 months later when he's 16-year-old, Imam Muhammad will say, as 16-year-old, he'll have to give zakah. Why will Imam Muhammad say as 16-year-old he have to give zakah?
Because even for a moment he was fine.
Even for a moment during the day he was fine. Imam Abu Hanifa normally agrees with that concept of even for a moment. However, he says in Junoon Asli there's another problem, which is if a person becomes baligh whilst majnoon, they're still like a sabi. They are not mukallaf, liable for anything Islamically. And he will remain adamul mukallaf. He's not mukallaf of doing any action. He's not responsible of doing any action at all still. All the way until the beginning of the 7th month when he became better, he was not mukallaf. So even the sabab was not found for him yet. Imam Abu Hanifa says the sabab of zakah is only found for him on the 7th month when he became better. So now for him the year will start on the 7th month. And the zakat anniversary will be 1 year after that, which is 16 years and 7 months. Or 6 months, at the end of 6 months. So at the beginning of 16 year and 7th month. So Imam Abu Hanifa will say it's only on the 16 year and 7th month when the zakah will actually become necessary upon this person. Why does he ignore the first few months? Because he says it was Junoon Asli. Junoon Asli is like a sabi. Before 15 years of age, nothing was liable upon him because he was not baligh yet, he was still a sabi. But the adamul taklif or adamul mukallaf continues until he becomes better. If that means for the next 10 years he's still majnoon, he wasn't mukallaf for anything in those 10 years. So Imam Abu Hanifa has a slight difference from Imam Muhammad here, which is Imam Abu Hanifa says for the first 6 months he was still majnoon, the sabab wasn't even found. Therefore, when he became better on 7th month, only then will the zakat become necessary. So 1 year after that, he'll have to give the zakat. Now you'll say, yeah, but at the end of the day, whether it's now or whether it's 6 months later, both agree he needs to give zakat. No, but what if this majnoon person passes away 3 months into his 16 years of age? If he passes away then, was his zakat anniversary met according to Imam Muhammad?
Yeah.
Yes. So he will have to have given zakah, or his guardians will have to give zakah from his money. Whereas, is his zakah anniversary met according to Imam Abu Hanifa?
Nope.
Nope. So nobody will need to give zakat from his money. Is that clear?
Yep, that's clear.
وعن أبي حنيفة رحمه الله أنه إذا بلغ مجنونا, if a person becomes baligh whilst he's majnoon, meaning junoon asli, يعتبر الحول من وقت الإفاقة, يعتبر الحول من وقت الإفاقة. You will only start the year. You will only count the sabab. You will only count the sabab. من وقت الإفاقة, from the time he gains consciousness. بمنزلة الصبي إذا بلغ. بمنزلة الصبي إذا بلغ. Imam Abu Hanifa does qiyas. He says just like a child. When a child becomes baligh, it's only after the child becomes baligh we start counting the zakat year. Only from the day they become baligh. We don't start counting it from the time they had the wealth or something. Similarly, a majnoon person, so a sabi only becomes mukallaf once they become baligh. So a majnoon, that was majnoon for even before bulugh, they remain majnoon only after ifaqah, only after they become better, ifaqah. They will be, the ifaqah is like their bulugh. The same way as sabi has bulugh, after bulugh, the masail only count. For a majnoon, it's only after ifaqah, the masail count, and the year starts from ifaqah, not from bulugh. Is that clear?
Yep, that's clear.
So the qiyas here is the same way as sabi, only after they become baligh, their year starts. A majnoon, only after the majnoon asli, only after the ifaqah, which is 7 months later, only then does the sabbath start, does the year start. Then alhamdulillah. Now our author doesn't actually give a clear preference between the views, but one thing is, he mentioned Imam Muhammad's view, who looks at only a juz of the year, and Imam Abu Hanifa also only looks at a juz of the year. Although there was an ikhtilaf between Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad in regards to Junoon Asli, but they both just look at juz of the year. Whereas Imam Abu Yusuf looks at majority of the year. It seems our author prefers Imam Abu Hanifa's view, and he's ended with that view. And many scholars actually give the view of Imam Abu Hanifa here as well, although some scholars have given preference to Imam Muhammad's view simply because there's more ihtiyat and more caution within that view. Is that okay, Yahya?
Yep, that's clear.
Any question?
No, no questions. Just for clarity, for not Asli, but for Aridi, Imam Abu Hanifa still has the same thought as Imam Muhammad.
Yeah, for Aridi, Imam Abu Hanifa, it says exactly the same as Imam Muhammad. Because in Aridi, when he becomes baligh, he'll be perfectly fine. So the sabab is found even according to Imam Abu Hanifa, because he was perfectly fine then.
Yeah, that's fine. So even if someone's 20 and they go Majnoon for 7 months,
So the chances are they already had a zakat anniversary date. So Imam Abu Hanifa, like Imam Muhammad, will continue with the earlier zakat anniversary date.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Is that clear? Any questions?
No, no questions.
Now the next mas'ala is totally different mas'ala. It's regarding slaves. Now just before we go into slaves, again, as I mentioned, certain times, if you've not studied the other chapters of fiqh, they might mix in with other chapters. So right now, the author is going to mention a mas'ala about slaves, but just very briefly, you get a normal slave who will just call abd. But then you get some special types of slaves. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them right now, but when you go and study the chapters of slavery, mudabbar, ummul walad, and number 3, mukatab. There are other types as well, but these are 3 of the famous ones. So you have a mukatab slave. That's the one we're focusing on. Mukatab slave, it comes from kataba, to write. So mukatab slave is when the master and the slave have written an agreement that the slave will pay off their freedom, you can say. Basically what that means, the slave will remain a slave still. The slave is still a slave. But they say to the master, for example, it could be any deal they make. But for example, the slave says, so let's just say I had a slave called Yusuf. So Yusuf comes to me, or I went to Yusuf and I say, I'll free you, but you have to give me 12,000 pounds in this 1 year. So 1,000 pounds every month. So every month Yusuf is giving me 1,000 pounds, 1,000 pounds, 1,000 pounds. By the end of the year, he pays the 12,000 pounds off. The second he pays that last penny, the last pence, the last dirham, the last coin, once he pays that last money, he will become totally free. But until he pays the last money, he is still a slave. Until he pays the last money, he is still a slave. So now my question, it came earlier in the book. Do slaves need to pay zakah?
We learned no.
No, because one of the conditions for paying zakah or zakah becoming wajib is you have to be a hur. So the condition of zakah was az-zakah wajibatun ala al-hurri, free person. So a slave doesn't need to give zakah. So what do you think of mukatab? Do you think a mukatab will need to give zakah?
Nope.
No, because they are still regarded as a
Slave.
And that's basically the correct answer. But someone may argue that no, a mukatab, okay, they're a slave, but why did you say a slave doesn't have to give zakah for? Why does a slave not need to give zakah? What's the normal reason we say a slave doesn't need to give zakah? Because they don't have
Wealth.
milkiyah. They don't have milkiyah. Rather, their wealth is all the master's wealth. A normal slave, their wealth is the master's wealth. However, a mukatab, his wealth, in a way, min wajhin, in a way, his wealth is established. So milk is thabit. So someone can argue, in a way, his wealth is established. How? The whole way that Yusuf, my slave, who's a mukatab, the way he'll basically be able to make money is if I allow him to trade. Now, when he trades, he's gathering money. And when he gathers that £1,000 a month, he gives it to me. But that £1,000, whilst he was gathering, you have to accept that that was Yusuf's money, the slave's money, so that he can gather, or basically he can save up money in that way. So you'll probably argue, someone could argue that Mukatab does actually have his own money. But our author will say, yes, in a way we agree he has his money, but he doesn't have full control over that money. And how? Go to slaves chapter. In slaves chapter we'll learn a Mukatab, okay, he's got his own money, he's got his own money, he's got his own money. After 7 months, so he was paying £1,000 a month, Yusuf in that same example. On the 7th month, he gives up. And he says, you know what, it's not worth basically trying to earn this £1,000 a month. I have to stay away for 22 hours a day, doing long shifts. It's just not worth my health. I give up, I'll become a normal slave again. As soon as he becomes a normal slave, everything he possesses goes back to the master. So whatever he gathered during that time, it all goes to the master. So in a way, he's still a slave. And his wealth is still, it's like it's suspended. It's 50-50. And because it's very weak wealth, it's not milk-e-tam. If you remember right at the beginning, he mentioned regarding Kitab al-Zakāt that malaka nisaban milkan tamman. His wealth is definitely not complete or proper, high-level, strong wealth. It's a very risky wealth that he has. Anytime it could just become the master's wealth. Correct?
Yep.
That's the thought process. وَلَيْسَ عَلَى الْمُكَاتَبِ زَكَاتٌ. The mukatab does not need to give zakah. لِأَنَّهُ لَيْسَ بِمَالِكٍ مِّن كُلِّ وَجْهٍ. Because he is not the owner of the wealth in every possible way. He is not the owner of the wealth in every possible way. Because you can say he's got milkiyah in terms of control of the wealth. But who owns him? Who owns this mukatab slave? Master. So okay, the slave might have his own wealth, but at the end of the day, his whole body and his whole being is in the ownership of the master. So he might have ownership over some money, 10, 20, 30,000 pounds. But that's nothing. He himself is owned by someone else. He himself is a milkiyah of someone else. So he's got possession, yadan, control over some money, but someone else has, so he's got possession over some money, but he doesn't even have milkiyah over his own body. لِأَنَّهُ لَيْسَ بِمَالِكٍ مِّن كُلِّ وَجْهٍ. But he's not malik in every possible way. He doesn't even have milkiyah over his own body, you can say, or you can explain it the way I explained it earlier. His milkiyah is very risky. Anytime he could become bankrupt. And why? لِوُجُودِ الْمُنَافِي. Because there's something present in this Yusuf which is against milkiyah. There's something present within this Yusuf which is against milkiyah, which stops him from gaining So there's something within this Yusuf which stops him from basically being the malik of the items fully, which is وَهُوَ الرِّقُّ, and that is slavery. Until he's still a slave, he can never be a complete owner of any wealth. وَلِهَذَا لَمْ يَكُنْ مِنْ أَهْلٍ أَن يُعْتِقَ عَبْدَهُ وَلِهَذَا لَمْ يَكُنْ مِنْ أَهْلٍ أَن يُعْتِقَ عَبْدَهُ وَمِنْ أَهْلِ أَن يُعْتِقَ عَبْدَهُ. Min ahli. Ahl can be a mudaf of the sentence أن يعتق عبده. وَلِهَذَا لَمْ يَكُنْ مِنْ أَهْلِ أن يعتق عبده. That's why he will never be of that authority that he himself can free his slaves. He himself can free his slaves. Now what does this mean? I'll briefly explain. So I own Yusuf. So let's just say Muawiyah. I own Yusuf. Yusuf is my slave. Now, which type of slave is Yusuf? I've allowed him to basically free himself, pay installments and free himself. For which type of slave is Yusuf? Mukatab slave. Now, a Mukatab slave normally has the chance to buy and sell things, to invest. In that way, to do business. In that way, he can make money. And because he can make money, then he'll be able to pay off the installments. So part of making money is he actually buys his own slaves. So he's a slave himself, but he buys his own slaves who'll work for him, he'll basically make him do work, and like that, he'll gather more and more wealth. So is he allowed to buy his own slaves? Yes, because that's babu tijara, that's allowed as part of business. And the fact that he's been made into a mukatab slave, he can do business. So business he can do. So he can definitely have his own slave or slaves. That's perfectly fine. However, so he owns these slaves. You can say he owns these slaves. Let's just say this slave is called Abdurrahman. So he owns the slave Abdurrahman. So he can do tijara with Abdurrahman by making him do work. But can he free Abdurrahman? Can he do itq, freedom of Abdurrahman? If Yusuf had 100% control over Abdurrahman, if Yusuf had 100% control over Abdurrahman from a Sharia perspective, we'll say yes, he can free Abdurrahman. Because Abdurrahman is his wealth, his milkiyah. He can do whatever he wants with his milkiyah. However, the rule of Sharia is lam yakun ay yu'tika abdahu. He cannot free his slave. He can make the slave do work, but he can't free the slave. Why can't he free the slave? Because freeing a slave is not min babi tijara. Rather, if you think of it from a worldly perspective, freeing a slave is min babin nuqsan. It's like a loss. It's a clear loss. You lost a slave that was worth £5,000. You freed him. You've just lost £5,000. By the way, in the akhirah, that's a gain. In the akhirah, there's a lot of reward for that. But we talk about in this world, you've just lost £5,000. That's not tijara. That's why Sharia have said a mukatab can't free their slave. They can have a slave for tijara purposes, but they can't free them. Because freeing them is not part of tijara. Rather, it's nuqsan. Anyway, that's the mas'ala. But what is it linked to our book here? It's linked, basically our author has just embedded with giving us an example that Yusuf, who's a mukatab, okay, he might be malik of some money, but he doesn't have 100% control. He does not have 100% control. And what's the proof he doesn't have 100% control? This mas'ala we just explained. That he can have a slave, but he can't free the slave, even though it's his own slave. وَلِهَذَا لَمْ يَكُنْ مِنْ أَهْلِ أَن يُعْتِقَ عَبْدَهُ. That's why he's not from amongst those people that can free his own slave. Is that clear, Yahya?
Yep, that's clear.
Any questions?
No questions.
Okay, from the next matan, وَمَنْ كَانَ عَلَيْهِ دَيْنٍ, it's masail of zakat regarding debts. We'll talk about that, inshallah, in the next session. May Allah increase your knowledge. May Allah put barakah in knowledge. Jazakallahu khairah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh.